Hey everyone, I wanted to make a video about this project that you've been seeing on my YouTube channel recently. In case you don't know, this is a passion project that I've been working on for about 4 years now, almost entirely by myself. And it started out as a simple Minecraft parkour map for me and my friends to play together, because at that time we were making parkour maps and I wanted to make one too. But this one kind of snowballed, and 4 years later, it kind of turned into something that was way cooler, and so I wanted to document this. That's what this is for. So today, I'm going to do some commentary and kind of explain the narrative and the story and the lore that I made up, and some of the symbolism and the reasonings behind the artistic choices that I made, because to me, this is a work of art, and I wanted to share it with you all. Also in a later video, I'm going to show how I made everything work with command blocks and structure blocks and all that. So if you're interested in that, feel free to stick around. Anyway, yeah, let's get started, and I hope you enjoy this. So right away, at the beginning of this map, you're hit with a warning for some graphic content. I'm not going to say much about it because you'll find out later on, but in case this stuff is sensitive to you, that's what that's for. But the first actual shot you see of this game is a candle in the distance. The candle that you see in the very beginning is meant to symbolize your lifetime. It's a candle, and it's incredibly finite, just like your life. In that, as you watch the candle, it gets shorter and shorter until your time runs out. So to speak, before your candle burns out, what will you have done with your life? Okay, welcome to the first level. This is Limbo, and the story is now starting, and you are the main character. The story starts with the main character being completely alone, which is one of the most important themes for the rest of the game. You wake up in an unfamiliar place, not knowing where you are or who you are, why you're there. So story-wise so far, there's not much to go off of. So here's some of the lore and symbolism. Limbo has a well-documented theme of being a place of in-between. The very definition of limbo is a state of uncertainty, neither here nor there. In Catholicism, limbo is a place where it's between heaven and hell, where souls are kept instead of being condemned. The only way to exit limbo is to be redeemed. But I wanted to put a spin on this in a way that is kind of spiritually unbiased, just for the sake of an original story. Instead of waiting for redemption, your character must find its own path out of limbo and fulfill your own personal destiny, whatever that may be. You can see some of these things spelled out in the first book that you find in Limbo, written by Virgilius Maro, the great Roman poet, who we'll talk more about later on. On the first page, this mentions dust and rubble, which I thought was an important detail because of how it sets the scene. As you can see, this place is empty. There's no one else here. It's just sort of monochromatic stillness. I chose to make Limbo look gray and monochrome for that very reason. I wanted it to feel cold and uninviting until you finally find the exit and make your way to the gates of hell. When you come up from the rubble, the gates of hell is revealed to you. This is when you realize there is no way out. You still don't know where you are, or who you are, or why you're there, but you have an instinct to keep moving forward. In front of you, the pathway collapses, and suggesting that this place has been here rotting for a long time before your arrival. As you move forward, you find a pilgrim's axe on the ground next to some bodily remains. This is the first sign of those who have come before you and who have seen these gates just as you have in this very moment. In order to open the gates, you first have to make a flesh offering. The fleshed key can be found in the hellish prison cells to the right of the room, where you must fight your way through the condemned souls. As I hinted here before, the transition between Limbo and the gates of hell is drastic. I did this specifically for the shock value of the monochrome to colorize trope in films such as The Wizard of Oz. Sticking with the theme of ancientness, I wanted everything to seem like it was made thousands of years ago, by beasts and demons, and not by men or angels. As you can see, the gates and the prisons are constructed with a sense of orderliness, yet they're crudely made to be strong, like something from Mordor in Lord of the Rings. As you place the fleshed key offering in the key slot, the gates open for you. I specifically designed the audio for this opening of the gates to sound like it was alive, like a gaping maw consuming another soul. This is also a huge turning point for your character, because subconsciously you know this is where things start to get crazy. This is where you're going to find out that things are really happening. There is a story here, and you're going to find out really soon. On the other side of the gates of hell, you fall from a great height onto your knees. This is the realm of greed. This level is also very important because it's the turning point from just wandering to actually adventuring. Clearly, you recognize that you're going only deeper into what seems like hell, only guided by candles up until this point. However, halfway through this level, you finally meet a new character. His name is Virgil, the great poet. He greets you with open arms, and he tries to vaguely explain what's going on. After confirming you're in hell, he mentions that he's missing 6 books, and he starts a side mission with you to recover them for beneficial potions that you can use. These potions include fire resistance, invisibility, and more. To retrieve his books, he hands you his personal quill, which is not only the key that lifts his magical books, but is also a token of his gratitude towards you, forming the beginnings of a long-lasting friendship. Just like the Virgil from Dante's Divine Comedy, this Virgil is meant to be your guide, helping you understand things and give you advice throughout your journey. The small, abandoned structure that you see first in Limbo is one of many hideouts that Virgil uses, but that one has been neglected as stated in the remaining text left behind in Limbo. If it isn't obvious to you, something is off about Virgil. He speaks in jolly third-person rhymes like Cicero from Skyrim, proving that he's been down here for quite some time. If you know anything about Dante's Divine Comedy, you know that Virgil is not a madman during that time period. So I was hoping this would suggest that our story takes place long after Dante's story, while also suggesting that the events of Dante's Divine Comedy may have actually happened, only if the story was twisted a little bit, and which you might understand later on. As you look around, you'll notice that there is what looks like boiling hot oil everywhere, or lava, dripping from the walls and eroding everything away. Erosion is a big theme in this level, because I thought about how greed as a sin kind of erodes away some of your good characteristics, like the ability to empathize and be selfless and generous. I intended for all the rocks and the geography to look like it's been eaten away by the erosion for the last 1,000 years or so. I also chose oil particularly because according to some depictions, eternally boiling in oil is the punishment for a greedy lifestyle. Every level has one book to find for Virgil, which describes the level that it's in. The color palette that I chose for this level is green and yellow because, while they go together in most cases, I found that the pale grays and greens contrast the orangey yellows really well. You'll see that every level has some sort of dramatic color contrast, which is heavily inspired by the paintings of Beksinski and the time that I spent in art classes and graphic design classes in high school, but we'll talk more about that later. But for now, we can conclude this level, moving on knowing that we have a new friend and new information that we can use later. As you exit greed, you find yourself in a realm that's frozen solid. You see a giant demon completely frozen in the icy lake with partially exposed flesh. Behind the monster, you see what looks like long-abandoned man-made ruins. There you find a Templar shield and another book for Virgil. When you speak to Virgil, he tells you a very interesting story. Virgil tells you about someone named the Strider and how he fought the huge demon stuck in the ice named Morag Dor. The Strider was actually a Templar warrior who was the only mortal worthy of going to hell alone. This is when you might realize just how valuable Virgil's books can be, because some of the things he talks about in his books, he never talks about in person. His book on envy states that Templars were experimenting with dark magica and were the first to cross dimensions, making contact with both demons and angels. Another thing mentioned is how heaven and hell energies created a super weapon, but we'll talk about that later. The Strider was seen as the chosen one to cross dimensions and ultimately kill Satan. Satan knew about this ahead of time, so he birthed a worthy warrior of his own to stop the Strider named Morag-Dor. As Virgil says, once the Strider entered this realm, called Envy, Morag-Dor burst through the ice and began fighting the Strider. Virgil recalls the Strider climbing up Morag-Dor and stabbing him directly in the heart with his holy sword. The Strider lost his grip, and as he fell down, he fell into the frozen lake, filling his iron boots with ice, permanently paralyzing his legs. The Strider was able to crawl to the shore and make shelter shortly before he died, with no way of going home. Virgil remembers all of this because he was actually there when it happened, under the showcase of how long he's been down here. Ultimately, you take the sword, fittingly named Morag's Bane, and of course Morag-Dor wakes up once again, starting the first boss fight of this game. One thing I should point out is that Envy is the first level where your character shows signs of self-doubt. We'll talk more about this later, but the whole overarching theme of this game centers around mental health, and this is the first time we see anything about this internal conflict with your character. So let's talk a little bit about the symbolism for Envy. The most obvious reference in this level is the depiction of Satan in Dante's Inferno. While Morag-Dor doesn't have multiple faces or wings, he is certainly stuck halfway in the ice, just like Satan was in Dante's Inferno. Just like greed, this level reflects the punishment for envy, which is being eternally submerged in freezing water. You'll notice immediately that the color palette for envy is very red versus blue. I wanted to make Morag stand out as much as possible, and I think the red versus blue in combination with his purple heart really worked. As a side note, the sound design in terms of atmosphere is very minimal in this level, because I wanted it to feel very still and frozen, like nothing here is moving. And in case you're wondering about the names that I chose for this level, the Strider is a reference to Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, and Morag-Dor is just something that my friend Bradley and I came up while we were trying to think of something like a cool demon name. I chose the Strider's name because it had a lone warrior feel to it, just like how it was implied in Lord of the Rings. And Morag-Dor had a nice ring to it because it really does sound like the name of some sort of monster or orc or demon. But anyways, that's kind of all I had to say about this level, so on to the next. Okay, welcome to Lust. Lust is a level that isn't incredibly important to the main story, but it's definitely a piece of the puzzle. First off, we have this huge evil tower that's being held up by a massive tentacle thing, but we don't know what that is. Everything around the tower is fire and brimstone, seemingly a collapse of what used to be a large area of land. Since the tower's main entrance is now inaccessible because of the collapsed floor, the only way in is to climb up the giant tentacle. So you make your way to the first room inside the tower, where you see a flowing intercore of lava, and a female voice calls out to you. You don't know where the voice is coming from, but you know they're manipulative and seductive. On the second floor, you meet Virgil once again. Virgil tells you that even he doesn't know what the tentacle is, but he knows it's holding the Lust's tower to protect Lilith, the first wife of Adam. Virgil warns you about her, saying she's dangerously seductive, which explains the voices you heard. If you happen to look above the tower when you first came into this level, you'll notice purple magic clouds. Those are incredibly important, and you'll see more of those later for a particular reason, which we'll talk about later. You can also see purple dust floating around the platforms that randomly disappear, as if controlled by some magical power. On the second floor of the tower, you find Virgil's book on lust. It again states something that Virgil doesn't. It reveals that even though the Strider failed to stop Satan, a separate event actually did stop Satan's reign. But it doesn't mention what that was or what happened. The text explains that this event caused mass destruction, collapsing the land around the Lust Tower like we saw before. The text also mentions the embodiment of Lilith. As you see, she's in some sort of spiritual glass form, nothing recognizable. But besides all that, I thought purple would be a perfect color for Lust. Everything is made out of this obsidian and delicate purple glass. Personally, the color palette of this level is one of my favorites because it's so complementary with the reds and the purples, yet it contrasts itself by the reds and oranges and the yellow versus blue. Speaking of yellows, I purposely made the crater below Lust Tower to look like fire and brimstone because that is part of the punishment for lust. Brimstone in particular is just sulfur, which is very yellow. Although when you read the second page of Virgil's book on lust, the punishment is way different for the sole purpose of extremism. The sound design and the dialogue in this level were heavily designed by the Lust chapter in Dante's Inferno, the game. If you know, you know. Anyways, Lilith turns out to be your second boss fight of this game. She tries to seduce you and try to make you stay, try to trick you, but you conquer that demon and you proceed forward. Okay, it's finally time to talk about Sloth, the second most important level in the entire game. When you arrive, you're greeted by Anubis and the Council of Duat. They are all-knowing, and they can grant you any knowledge in exchange for finishing their trial. The trial is simple. Collect all 3 fragments for the Staff of Ra from the 3 abandoned tombs. Return the fragments and repair the Staff of Ra to help the Council of Duat travel all dimensions once again. The reason why Sloth is so important is because you finally learn who your character is and why you're in hell. After fulfilling your promise to gather all 3 parts of the Staff of Ra and put it back together, Anubis tells you that your name is Mark, and you're in hell because you committed suicide. But Anubis says one really important thing that isn't fully explained in this story. He says, quote, "This is not hell, this is your hell. Everyone has their own hell. You must conquer yours." End quote. Just like he said, the concept is that everyone has their own version of hell. Hell itself exists in one place and time for everyone like normal, but everyone goes through their own hell alone. That means that everyone's hell is a different experience based on their life choices before death. This is clearly meant to be an allegory for everyone having their own struggles in life. Everyone has their own demons that they need to fight. However, even though all sinners experience hell in the same place and the same time, most of them can't see each other or interact with each other, because their hell is only meant for them as they suffer alone. So this is the point where I should briefly introduce the topic of major hell and minor hell. Major hell is just hell itself, where everyone exists at once, but minor hell is everyone's individualized experience, like I said before. As a side note, the souls who are visible to everyone are the enemies and the monsters that you fight throughout each level. They are the demons bred and birthed in hell to punish sinners. The eternally damned souls, who do not deserve to ever come out of hell, are locked in the prisons covering the walls of each realm. Speaking of which, the subtle voices that you hear all the time are the voices and the spirits of those like yourself, those who have a chance at redemption and conquering their hell, who can't see each other. But until we move on, I'm going to continue with this topic later when more information emerges. Anyways, some of the things that I think make this level visually appealing include ancient styles of architecture and the striking blue lapis contrasting the Uric sands. Each room is very different in this level, and you kind of get the best of both worlds. Some rooms are desert dry, and other rooms are overgrown with poisonous water and vegetation. I was really going for the Indiana Jones vibe of this level, and I think the custom hieroglyphics scattered around the pillars really pulled it all together. And those are random, by the way. They don't actually mean anything specific. I also wanted to thank my friend Bradley for designing how Anubis looks. I think he did an amazing job. So, now that we know who we are and why we're in hell, Anubis tells Mark that the only way forward is to go deeper. So, reluctantly, Mark proceeds into the portal to venture to the next level. As soon as Mark enters the portal, he realizes he's inside a living titan. As he makes his way through the doors of flesh and down the bowels, Mark finds Virgil's book, which says a little bit more about this place. This is the realm of Gluttony, the belly of the beast named Siako, the foul mancubus. Siako exists in major hell, while his gut exists in minor hell for every soul to endure. Virgil's book also mentions Ulcerus, the great serpent worm, for the first time. The book says, quote, "Ulcerus bears 3 minds, yet 1 gaping maw," end quote. When Mark meets Virgil once again, Virgil warns that Mark must bargain with Ulcerus, because it's the only way out of gluttony. Having no choice, Mark enters the gut where Ulcerus resides. Ulcerus is blind. It can't see, but it can sense and smell Mark's flesh. Ulcerus has 3 minds, and they are revealed as Lout, Ardent, and Nemes. Lout and Nemes argue about who wants to eat Mark first, but Ardent, the wisest of the 3, knows Mark's flesh is different. Mark learns that Ulcerus is being held against the will within this realm. The word master is muttered, and that catches Mark's attention, so he begins to question Ulcerus. Ardent says that they are the mouth of Mentum. Mentum is a name that Mark hasn't heard yet. Before they can explain, Ardent promptly tells Mark to take the weapon from beside them. Once he takes it, Ulcerus explains what that weapon is and why Mark needs to take it. So if you remember, we spoke about something like this in the realm of envy. To reiterate, Virgil's book on envy states that the Templars were experimenting with dark magicka, and were the first to cross dimensions and make contact with demons and angels. Another thing that's mentioned in the book is how heaven and hell energies created a super weapon. That super weapon is the Argent Star. The creation story and the formidable truth of the Argent Star is explained in more detail by Ulcerus. Ulcerus says, quote, "It saved worlds from extinction. It healed the sick. It gave infinite power to those worthy of it." End quote. Next, Ardent says that the only way to free Ulcerus and fulfill Mark's destiny is to use the Argent Star against Mentum. Now, at this point, we still don't know who Mentum is, but we know he's a bad guy. So let's take a step back and examine Gluttony as a level. If you remember the tentacle that was holding up the Lost Tower, now you know that it is Ulcerus. Somehow, Mentum has forced Ulcerus to hold realms of this minor hell together. Ulcerus is a special character inspired by many things like Gollum, Cerberus, and even the text of St. Thomas Aquinas. The interpretations of Gollum and Cerberus are very clear, but Thomas Aquinas has a very vital role in how Ulcerus was named. Ulcerus is just a Latin word for ulcer, fitting the theme of infested bowels and guts, etc. But Lout, Ardent, and Nemes are directly from 3 of the 5 things that Thomas Aquinas classifies as manifestations of gluttony. According to him, Lout is eating food that is too costly or luxurious. Ardenter is eating too eagerly, and Nemes is eating too much. Now, these classifications don't directly correspond with the 3 personalities of Ulcerus, but they are all certainly different characters on their own. Lout is argumentative, and Nemes is naive. Ardent is clearly the wise leader. Speaking of Lord of the Rings, Ulcerus's mouth is clearly inspired by the Mouth of Sauron. It's one of my favorite builds of the entire map. Also, I hope some people got the Doom Eternal reference about the whole Argent dialogue thing. I kinda completely stole that. Either way, to get to the next level, Ulcerus offers to swallow Mark whole, and even though it is disgusting and Mark doesn't want to, he proceeds. And now we move on to the first part of the final and most important level in this Minecraft parkour story map. It's called Wrath. Immediately, as Mark enters the realm of Wrath, you notice another tentacle from Ulcerus that has its grip on something else. But this time, it's not holding something up, it's pulling something down. An enormous arm is reaching upwards in desperation, bearing a glowing pentagram on its palm. After climbing the massive arm, you look around and you notice floating platforms, thousands of feet above what used to be solid ground. On top of these platforms is the remains of what looks like an unknown, abandoned ancient city. Mark bravely traverses these platforms and encounters a second room with a broken path, leading to an enormous set of gates. A large monster unearths itself from the ground before the gates. It roars at Mark. It boldly claims that no one shall pass the gates of Dis so long as he remains standing. With great speed and heart, Mark attacks the Beast Guardian and fells him on his knees, dropping a map and severing one of his horns from his unsightly head. Once the gates of Dis are opened, the great maze of Dis is revealed to Mark through a thick fog. Mark makes his way to the entrance of the maze, realizing that the tattered map is his only guide, especially because there's still no sight of Virgil in the Realm of Wrath. After walking for a short time, Mark sees the first sign of Virgil, his book on Wrath, the final book. This is the most valuable information about Mentum that Virgil has given us so far. The book says, quote, "The city of Dis stood for hundreds of millennia. Satan ruled this realm, but was powerless against the entity manifest, Mentum. With unfathomable power, Mentum banished Satan into the deep, crowning Mentum as Satan II, Lord of Wrath." End quote. Now we know for a fact who that giant arm belongs to at the beginning of this realm. That is Satan himself, being pulled down by Ulcerus and held in place by Mentum's magic. It's also pretty clear that the purple clouds we see in each level is the dark magic cast from Mentum. Now that we know that Mentum's magic reaches the deepest depths of Major and Minor Hell, we can also conclude that the event of Satan's demise is what caused the great collapse of so many realms, based on what is said in Virgil's book on Wrath. More on that later. As Mark wanders throughout the maze, he stumbles across a small door that needs a key that he doesn't have. On his way back through the maze to find the key, he meets a new character. He's an anxious fellow, hiding in a small box. His name is Quagark, and he's just a little guy who loves making sacred pots and urns for the dead, and a lot of his work can be seen throughout the realm of Sloth. Quagark says that his favorite pot has gone missing, and Mark politely offers to help. When all 4 of the pottery shards are found, Mark returns them to Quagark, and he even repairs the pot himself. Quagark is joyful, and he asks what he can do to return the favor. So, Mark asks for the key to the door he saw earlier, and without a second thought, Quagark answers his request. Just beyond the door awaits Virgil, but to Mark's surprise, this is the last time he will ever see Virgil. Virgil already knows. He's seen this hero's journey for many others before Mark. He reveals that there is no return, and Mark must go alone. But graciously, Virgil offers one more piece of advice and even a final gift in his barrel. Knowing his fate, Mark walks down the stairs into the deep, where the portal to Mentum's lair is open. Now before we continue with part 2 of Wrath in the Nether, I'd like to talk a little bit about this level first. Firstly, the city of Dis. In case you didn't notice, all the buildings seem like they're alive. They all have what looks like eyes glaring at you at all times. I did this solely to give the feeling of being watched while you get lost in the maze. I also intended everything in the maze to look similar, so it would be much harder to find your way. Even in my playthrough of Wrath you can find on my YouTube channel, I got lost in my own maze. However, the individual buildings were inspired by a particular painting by Beksinski, a painting called AA78. I'll throw that up on the screen now so you can see. The colors are flipped in my work, but the theme of overgrowth and abandonment is still present. But talking about the city of Dis more specifically, it's a clear reference to Dante's Inferno. In the 6th book of Virgil's Aeneid, which is supposedly one of the biggest influences to Dante Alighieri's depiction of hell, the city of Dis is described in some detail. Fittingly, Virgil's book on Wrath is the 6th and final book that you can find in this game, and it talks a little bit about the city of Dis as well. As a side note, I want to mention that Wrath is the level where Mark really starts remembering and reminiscing about those feelings that he had before waking up in hell, to put it lightly. Feelings of loneliness and depression and self-doubt can be seen throughout this level, especially in the monologues. That's why Mark is so upset that Virgil can no longer help him on his journey. Virgil is kind enough to give Mark his personal bow and arrow because he knows Mentum can't be defeated without it. Nevertheless, Mark conquers Wrath Part 1 and descends into the Nether for Wrath Part 2. seconds after Mark walks through the portal, it shatters and closes forever. Virgil was right. There is no way home. Just ahead, Mark sees the first blue tree that Virgil advised him to follow. However, when Mark goes up to the tree, he hears a groan. Mark looks around and doesn't see who could have made that noise. Still, Mark carries on. He sees another tree and hears another moan. This time, Mark notices that the noises must be coming from the tree itself. Mark then comes across a wall of impenetrable vines. It's a dead end. Upon wielding the star, the wall of vines instantly untangles, revealing a third tree. When Mark hears the next whisper, he gets it. The trees are just like him, the prison-like embodiment of those who ended their own lives. Mark continues on and sees more souls just like him, but instead of trees, they're hanging from those trees and crucified on crosses. Mark meets a fourth tree, but this time, the tree says, quote, "Friend ahead," end quote. Once again, a new character is introduced. Revis is a friendly soul who tells Mark even more about himself on the way to Mentum's lair. There's some interesting lore around these two characters that I would like to share. As Revis says, he arrives in Hell after his suicide, just like Mark. Within a short time, he was greeted by Virgil, when Virgil was still young and sane, shortly after Dante Alighieri's adventure. Virgil helped Revis seek redemption, but Revis decided to stay in Hell because he wanted to aid the lost souls just like Virgil did for him. It's clear that Virgil and Revis remained friends for thousands of years. After Revis made his decision to stay in Hell, he stumbled upon a mysterious egg. Revis took the egg and waited for it to hatch. When the egg hatched, Revis realized it was a lava walker. At the time, lava walkers were seen wandering throughout the realm of Wrath, especially in service to the city of Dis, much like horse and buggy or travel on horseback. Just like Revis said, he raised Geryon for hundreds of years, even outlasting the extinction of her own species. However, when Geryon grew to adulthood, the war between heaven and hell erupted. Satan and his demons clashed against God and his angels for hundreds of years. Satan's tank force was the lava walkers, causing the great extinction of their species. Instead of fighting for Satan, both Revis and Geryon fought many battles against Satan, joining forces with other rebels, crippling Satan's defenses against God and his angels. Proof of this can be seen in Revis's banner, a flag made to signify the union of his rebellion. Every single lava walker perished except for Geryon as Satan retreated his armies. So fast forward to Mark's timeline. Geryon is an elder. As he says, Revis makes sure every trip counts while he helps lost souls like Mark find their way. Anyway, unfortunately the only way forward for Mark is to confront Mentum alone. Unexpectedly, Revis and Geryon are pulled under the water by something ominous. This enrages Mark, as he lashes out to Mentum, who he can't see yet. Mentum then finally shows himself to Mark with a menacing entrance. This is when we learn who Mentum really is. Just as Mentum claims, Mark and Mentum are one and the same. When Mark committed suicide, his version of minor hell spawned. However, his hell was different than everyone else's. Mark's darkest psychological manifest was so powerful that it became a physical force that crossed over the boundary between Mark's minor hell and Satan's realm in major hell. Mentum was Mark's manifest. Everyone's manifest is the ruler of their own minor hell, but Mark's manifest was so powerful that it broke through the barrier of major hell. In the time that Mark was in Limbo, Mentum took full control. He broke through the dimensional barrier and spread himself like an evil fungus. Mentum wasted no time and headed straight for Satan's lair. Even though Satan was one of the most powerful forces of all time, he was still no match for Mentum, especially because this is the first event that Satan never saw coming. When Satan's reign was thwarted, everything in Major Hell collapsed with him. This explains why everything we see is disrupted and in ruins. So anyways, let's talk a little bit about the second half of Wrath in the Nether and its design choices. This is by far the most important level, and that's why there's not a whole lot of parkour. It's mainly just story-based. My focus for Wrath Part 2 was to make you feel really small. A lot like Lovecraftian horror, or how media like Lord of the Rings or FromSoft games makes you feel really small. One of the biggest inspirations for Wrath Part 2 was actually Skyrim. Garion's design was clearly emulated from the Silt Striders in the Elder Scrolls franchise. Also, Revis was named directly from Revis Servani, who is a caretaker of the last Silt Strider in Skyrim. Very similar stories there. Garion was named after the mythological creature depicted in Dante's Inferno, who takes Dante and Virgil from the 7th circle of hell to the 8th circle of hell. A lot like how Garion in this game takes Mark and Revis to Menthem's lair. Another inspiration that I think is noteworthy is about the blue trees that lead to Revis and Garion. They were inspired by the tortured forest in Dante's Inferno, where the act of suicide is punished by encasing the soul in a tree, trapping them forever. So the last detail that I wanted to talk about is the themes throughout this game about loneliness and depression and self-sabotage and self-doubt. Those sorts of themes on mental health are incredibly important to this story. The only reason I did this was because I wanted to make a story that people could relate to. I can relate to it in some ways, and I think a good story is one that people can relate to. You can see this all over the place in media such as movies, TV, music, books, all kinds of stuff. So that aspect is really important for me to share because I know a lot of people can relate to this. So with all of that out of the way, let's enjoy the rest of this fight between Mark and Mentem, as Mark literally conquers himself, and I'll come back in a couple minutes to explain and share the end for some final details. And there you have it. Mark conquered himself. He battled his demons. He made it all the way to the end. In the final scene, you can see most of the realms actually collapse for good. This is Mark's minor hell finally being destroyed because it no longer needs to exist, now that his soul has found redemption. But since Mark's minor hell and major hell are technically connected, those realms also collapsed in major hell. This also means that these realms no longer serve their purpose as punishments until Satan rises again and rebuilds his kingdom, so to speak. As to where Mark goes after that, that's up to interpretation. I do not know. So, anyway, this has been the story of Conquer Self. Of course, there's so many details and aspects that I could talk about forever, but I wanted to make this something enjoyable, so I stuck with the most important stuff. Like I said before, this has been a passion project of mine over the last 4 years, and I really felt the need to make this after it kind of snowballed into something that I was proud of. And that's part of the reason why you're seeing it on my YouTube channel, because this is something that I wanted to document for me and my friends who were part of this journey. Speaking of my friends, I invited them to play the entire game, and I recorded the whole thing. So you'll be seeing that in the coming weeks, and so if you're interested, look forward to that. And I guess as some parting words, thanks to everyone who helped with this project. Thanks for watching, and especially to all my friends for helping with play testing and some ideas. Huge thank you to them. Also, in a later video, I'm going to show how I made everything work with command blocks and structure blocks and all that. So if you're interested in that, feel free to stick around. So I'm going to leave this here. I hope you all enjoyed this, and if you didn't, that's okay. I don't think I'll be doing something like this again. This is for me, and this is for my friends. Also, just quickly, if you are someone who is struggling with mental health, I see you, and I love you, and this is your sign to have a good day. So, anyways, I'm going to end this here. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.